Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Rook with Brad Kooima of Kooima Varilek. We see a lot of green on the board in both grain and livestock futures trade this morning. And Brad, we don't see that very often, but cattle market is kind of working in and digesting these cattle on feed report numbers, especially placements, pretty positive, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Especially thanks for having me on a sharply higher day. We don't come by these very often, right? I mean, if we were only going to do your show on these days, we wouldn't be on here very often. Yeah, there was a moment this morning where everything that I have on my, what I call my front screen, the stuff I care about, corn, beans, cattle, even hogs, and the S&P and the bonds and a few other miscellaneous things that I watch, everything was higher for a while today. So yes, market reaction mainly here, I think, to a cattle and feed report on Friday afternoon, which was particularly friendly placements. The other two categories pretty neutral based on expectations, but down a nice chunk on the placements. And to take a little deeper dive into how the placements came in that way, it would be two states really, and one would be mine, Iowa, and the other one would be Kansas. Both of the placements on those two states coming in at a whopping 78%. Colorado showed a nice increase, but they've been on the decline for just about going on 2 years. They better catch up, or they won't matter anymore for a while. But so they had some bigger placements there. I think it's interesting just because when you separate the corporate states and the more independent small producer states, now we're seeing it impacting all of them. So
yeah, and you said other than that, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about in the report, including weight breakdowns or anything?
No, normally I'm kind of a nerd that way and digging around it, but I didn't see, in fact, the placements for the 700 pounders and less and the 700 pounders and more, that's the way I split those two categories up, were the same. Kind of digging through some of the placement data, if I had to guess it, I'd say it's maybe most friendly to December. But we can do some things maybe to change the supply for December too, of course, between now and then. But and the market seems to think that way too. Right now, the December is the strongest thing up there, up over a little bit to over $2. So it was kind of a non-event last week here in my area for cash. The South had everybody, me included, a little excited when the early week they held out and got steady for them, which was 188. So we thought, well, we should get steady also, which would have been 198. There was just a tiny bit of that done to a couple of regionals Thursday, but by Friday, everybody was dug in at 196. So there was maybe a little light trade there, but for the most part, here we didn't trade, we passed, and when you're this current and this small of a show list, you can get by with that. Show list here, I don't know really how to express how much lower they are than what they normally are for this time of year, but it's like a third, okay, of what normally we would have this time of July. And yeah, I continue to say that same old thing. The cattle are not here in the north.
Although we have had boxes which have kind of turned over, and that seemed to be giving the packer a little bit of leverage in terms of the cash trade and the break that we saw last week. Do you think we're going to be lower again this week? Packers are going to have to pick up numbers here with what you said about negotiated numbers being down.
Right. Not sure exactly. I'll answer the question the way I think you asked it. I think the boxes will be lower. Yeah. Okay. They almost always are at the end of July. Cash now, that's another thing. I'm not convinced cash is going to be lower. We still have leverage here from the standpoint of a feedlot that doesn't, the cattle that we're showing here aren't very fat at all. I haven't given up on the idea that we can't get back to 198 by Friday on the cash, at least in my neighborhood. When the South already showed some resolve, I thought, last week by holding out for steady. So let's call it steady, 188 in the South, 198 in the North. That's only a $10 difference. I wonder why. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we've talked about that. Negotiated is the way to go here, and that's why the North has been trading premium to the South. Also concerned about, you get a lot of questions about why the futures have traded at such a discount to the cash, even the weeks where we've had this higher cash trade. Does that continue?
Well, that's a 400 level question. I don't sure if I've got a freshman answer, but I think there's a lot of factors here. It starts with a long speculator that's scared to trade, and he's scared to trade for what reason? Because of a black swan event, because of uncertainty. Sure, certainly that's part of the deal. High price probably not takes the fair amount of guts to, be long cattle at this high a level. But of course, I still think there's some nuances here with the contract specs. And the CME is doing a survey right now. Please take the time to answer that survey. I think that there are a few things that they could do to maybe sweeten the contract for the long speculator and not make all the rules for the short hedger. Things like weights, things like a delivery process, things like that. I think that we could do, and we should also lower the trading limits. These are ridiculous that we can move this much in a day. That also strikes terror in the part of a long speculator, right? When the market can break that much in a day. So I'm hopeful maybe we can make some changes, although typically I've been disappointed with those potential changes from the CME, but maybe this time it'll be different.
Okay. Weekly slaughter last week, 584,000 head is all in. So the packers continue to slow these chain speeds, or is that the number thing?
Well, then we had a computer problem.
Yeah.
I know a couple of them lost. There was one major I know lost, I don't know, 3-4 hours, maybe more than that. Now, what I've been hearing on the slaughter thing, and here and there, people take a Friday off too. That's what they did in 14 when numbers got this tight. There's a bit of that happened last week, and there's going to be a bit of that happens this week. I understand, but I'll bet a steak dinner that they'll revise the slaughter higher. I hear that maybe that slaughter level is a little underestimated, but we'll see. But part of this is what happens when you don't have enough cattle. There's not enough to go around. So at this point, I don't know. I'm not caught up in the light slaughters being a problem yet. If I saw the weight start to really skyrocket, I'd be more worried.
Okay. And weights were, up above a year ago and last week, but like you said, not too concerning here. Lean hog
on the weight thing, Michelle, I'm sorry. I'd be curious to see this week's data, because that would be the week that we had that it was 96 degrees, so maybe we'll take a little of that weight off. We'll see.
Yeah, because that lags, doesn't it?
2 weeks, you done.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, hogs. Looks like we put in a bottom off the contract lows. We had a higher weekly close last week. Cutouts have been moving above $100. Can we keep going there, though?
And weight's finally starting to come down, and some of that might be weather. Some of that may be finally getting through some of that supply. It seems like we're okay from an export standpoint. I don't know, another hog analyst and I launched into a kind of a waste of time debate early this morning about politics and what that means potentially to things like grains and hogs, and maybe to a degree the cattle. I guess we're talking about what if there's a Trump win, what happened last time. Of course, real tough, tight tariff type policy with China. Would there be a potential here that maybe there'd be some pre-buying, by an export partner that might be looking at the same thing as we are? Maybe they want to get ahead a little bit on some, soybean and or pork purchases. I guess maybe I'm dreaming here, but I agree with you. I do think the lows are in. I think August hogs ought to be able to get back to 96 cents or something like that. But it'll take some real news to get us much further than that. We just have an awful lot of them around.
Yeah, and add on top of that, China announcing over the weekend lower short-term and long-term interest rates, which should also help them be a bigger player on the export front. That seems to be helping the grains this morning, especially soybeans, but that's also about weather, isn't it?
It seems to be. We're going to talk weather for a little bit yet here, Michelle, and that long range for the 6 to 10 days warmer, drier. Imagine that after rain. But I think the other thing is we are ridiculously oversold, and I mean the sentiment is so bearish. This is about as bad as I can remember it. Everybody thinks it's going to nothing, it seems like. So hopefully we can catch these people a little bit off guard. I'd like to think maybe with a little luck you could get December corn back to 440. That might be stretching. That's halfway back of this last leg down. That feels like a lot to me, and honestly, and I think November beans, if it can get anywhere near $11, it'll get some selling too. But let's hope we can get a bounce from here on a little bit, maybe more of a threatening weather pattern and reacting to an oversold market.
Yeah, and we do have at least some export customers that have been thinking that we're down at a value level. More corn business to Mexico this morning, some sales of soybeans last week, right?
We've said before, and I think, I don't know, people maybe say different things, but to me, there's actually a little bit of a bullish story for old crop corn. I'm not sure I can make one up for beans as well, but you got the ethanol grind. Yeah, exports have been good. Basis levels out here. I mean, basis levels tightened, got stronger again around here last week. So some places over 50 cents over now. So if there's that big supply oak crop laying around, why is the basis getting stronger? So I don't know. We'll see.
No doubt. All right. And farmers aren't selling, so that also kind of helps the basis. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Brad Kooima with Kooima Varilek. This is Markets Now.